Hi, this is Savannah,
And this is Brian from the Dorky Diva Show,
and you're listening to Starboars.
the best place for below average Star Wars.
Welcome to Starboars, the best place for below average Star Wars.
Hello there, and welcome to the Star Wars Show, the best place for below average Star Wars. I'm the Jolly Jedi Pete, and I'm back with another episode of our Purely BELTA series. This is episode 2 of Purely BELTA. For those who don't know what Purely BELTA is, the term Purely BELTA is a slang term up here in the northeast of England, Newcastle, where I'm from, and where I'm recording from, and it means something that's very good or like brilliant or excellent. To give you some context, if I was going to go to my favourite chicken place, which is Fed's Chicken here in Newcastle in the Granger Market, and I got my favourite chicken roll from there, that chicken roll is Purely BELTA. And today, he's recording at a crazy time at night over in the US of A, and I am recording at a crazy time of morning here in the UK. I have Brandon from the Talking B94 podcast. Brandon, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't know if I'm sleepy or like just deranged at this time, but I feel good. We're going to go with it.
That's good because I don't know if I'm sleepy or deranged. So I think this is going to be good energy that will just kind of bounce off each other for the rest of this episode. It'll be real good.
Awesome. And are you excited to tell us what you think is Purely BELTA about Star Wars?
I'm pumped, and I'm also pumped to learn what that phrase was. I was like, okay, how do you spell that? What is that? And I'm just, again, it's late at night. I'm learning new things. I'm feeling really, really good. So
it was really cool. So in the first episode that we recorded with Brian Balance, who did Qui-Gon Jinn as his Purely BELTA thing about Star Wars, Brian was sort of obsessed with the term and was doing all different kinds of accents, trying to see. So it was a lot of fun there as well.
Oh, see, here's the thing. Now I'm going up against Brian, one of the best in the biz, right? And I can't compete with that. I'm going to try to say it at some point. It's going to sound super American. It's going to sound super Texan. It's going to not sound as beautiful as how you say it. So everyone just prepare yourself for that because it's not going to be on the Brian balance level for sure.
I know Brian was. I like to refer to Brian as the podcast king, just because of how awesome his content is that he does put out there.
I agree 100%. Let's get him a crown.
We'll present it to him at a celebration.
Okay, honestly, we're joking, and I know we have questions to get through, whatever, but this is a really good idea. I am 100% down to like crowdfund a nice little podcast king crown for Brian Balance and present it coronation style, maybe at the next celebration. That's a really good idea, actually.
And the best thing will be is that I know for a fine fact he hates fuss, so he'll absolutely be.
He will be so mad, but he really does deserve it. Yeah, he does. He deserves it 100%, and everyone would be into it. Every other podcast on the entire Star Wars Twitter or whatever would be like, yes, of course, let's do this. So it's great.
So let's dive straight in. So obviously, Star Wars is one of the best things ever. Star Wars in itself is Purely BELTA. But what is it about Star Wars that you think is Purely BELTA?
So, I mean, it's pretty. If you look at my podcast, you look at my Twitter, you look at just who I am and what I collect, the thing that I have always gravitated towards Star Wars is not even Star Wars, even much I love the movies, I love the TV shows, I love the books. It's the making of Star Wars and the content and the documentaries and the books and everything that we've gotten in the past 40 years surrounding it. And that to me makes everything feel so much more tangible and feels so much more real, and makes me love Star Wars even more. So that, if we're saying behind the scenes of Star Wars, is okay. I'm going to say it, Purely BELTA. That's how it texts. Purely BELTA. That's what I would say.
Awesome. So the making of Star Wars / the behind the scenes content that we've gotten.
Yeah.
So my first question for you, Brandon, is what's the first piece of making of / behind the scenes media that you consumed as a Star Wars fan?
So the first one I remember is on the VHS for the special editions. And you can still watch them. It's the Anatomy of a Dewback that they kind of spliced around and then put at the beginning of all those VHS tapes. So for A New Hope, they had part of that that said, "Hey, here is how he made the Dewbacks. Here's how he made Jabba." And then they had interviews with like Mark Hamill talking about. I remember. I think the phrase is they put together a bunch of ping pong tables and tchotchkes and lit it on fire in the parking lot. And that's how he described the Death Star. And so that first, it's probably a 5-minute clip that plays before the actual movie, got me just so much more hyped to actually watch Star Wars and keep watching Star Wars on that VHS tape. And I think that more than anything has kind of just stayed in the back of my mind for that's almost 20 years now. So
I've never actually seen those. So after my first piece of behind the scenes making of medium that I consumed, that was also on the front of a VHS as well. I think it was the VHS release before the special editions came out. I remember the front of the box having like sort of a red metallic writing on the Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and the Return of the Jedi logos. And it was like a George Lucas interview with, I believe, Lennon Moulton. Only about 10-15 minutes long. And sort of, I was probably early teenage at the time, maybe 12, 13. And I remember sort of remember he like obviously knew who George Lucas was by like the name everywhere and like consumed a lot of Star Wars as a kid, but then like actually seeing him in person and seeing someone speak to him and seeing him talk about Star Wars was quite sort of eye opening. And like I don't know if I would become the fan I was if I hadn't had that sort of connection to the maker at like an early age. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. And actually, because I don't get starstruck that often, really. And I was actually at a film festival last year, I guess 2 years ago. I guess I forget last year was a year. In 2019, I was in a film festival in Austin, and we were just kind of walking around, and there was Leonard Maltin. And I was like, and I went up to him because I had the same experience you did watching those interviews, but kind of after the fact. It was like the VHS we would rent from the library was not the special edition, so it was this version that you're talking about, and it's a great interview. But I kind of went up to him and just kind of gushed about these interviews that he recorded 30 years ago. He was very nice about it. But I have a very nice picture where I'm just like shaking next to Leonard Maltin. But yeah, very formative stuff, and again goes back to what we're saying, like George Lucas has made a conscientious effort throughout the years, and it's continued with Disney, but to kind of unveil a little bit past the curtain of how movies are made. And I think that's been very, very important and very evident through all of this.
I think it's probably maybe turned full circle with obviously the upcoming Lucas Museum of Narrative Art that is coming to. I think is it LA? It's coming to.
It's coming to LA.
So that's going to be sort of a museum all about sort of making movies and making modern stories by the sounds of it. So looking forward to seeing all the things from his personal collection going to be on display there.
Right. Every Norman Rockefeller painting you could possibly think of, all there. Norman Rockwell painting that you can think of will all be there. It's gonna be crazy stuff. I can't wait for that to open.
What's some of the best things you've learned from making ofs and behind the scenes media?
I mean, I'll go a little broad initially, which is at least with like what we're saying with the VHS little behind the scenes features, but then especially ramping up with the prequels. Those DVDs are incredible. Of course, the beginning on Phantom Menace, but then Puppets to Pixels, and within a minute on Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, especially, were great deep looks into how movies were made. But for me personally, taught me that being creative was a professional thing that I could do. I kind of grew up in a family of engineers and doctors, and I never really kind of understood that, like, the things that I like to do, which were to write and to read and to, you know, be creative and express myself, were possible job options. Right? I was like, the best thing I could do is maybe like be a lawyer, and it, in that sense. And these documentaries really showed me that people that were creative and that were imaginative were able to be employed and be celebrated and do something that they were passionate about. And that, more than anything, kind of has stuck with me throughout all these years. And then what I love especially about these prequel documentaries is you really do see the growth of digital technology and how movies are made. And without the prequels, you really don't get these movies that we have now, right? You don't get the Marvel movies, you don't get literally anything that's come out in a movie theater in the past 10 years without the advancements that they were making back in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, I think it was ILM working on Jurassic Park for Spielberg is what
Mm-hmm.
George sort of witnessed and thought,
Yeah.
well, we can go back and do the special editions now.
Yes, he knew that it was possible. He's like, okay, let's test this out.
And I think another thing, like one of the things I loved about, especially the Phantom Menace documentary, was you sort of see the teams struggling at the beginning. Like they don't know, they've got the idea on what they want to do, but they don't know how to pull it off. And then George is like, has full faith in his teams, like, yes, we'll pull this off. Don't worry, we'll figure it out.
Right.
And I love the bit about essentially what was the precursor to sort of Gollum in Lord of the Rings when they're trying to figure out how to do Jar Jar. And they
Right.
spend a lot of money on that Jar Jar suit, which they don't actually need in the end.
Right.
Which
I
I
love
thought
it.
was
And
really cool.
I also, there's also that brief scene in that documentary, and it really has just stuck with me. And I want to know where that is. They built the Jar Jar puppet as just a test, just to maybe, I don't think it was even to see if they could use it on the screen. I think it was mostly to see like how the ears would flap and like how he would move, But it's a beautiful puppet. And I'm just like, if they made a replica of that, if they had that on a display at a celebration, I would be all in. I would be the first person in line to kind of see that. That'd be the best.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, like, I think the prequels gets a reputation for green screen and it all being sort of done in a computer and there being no sort of physical effects. But obviously, that Jar Jar puppet was made. Jar Jar was on screen for the majority of these scenes. He wasn't just in a mocap suit; he was in a Jar Jar suit, which they then like sort of attached the motion capture to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think obviously here in the UK, I think it was last year, the year before, we had the exhibition was here, Star Wars Identities,
Oh, nice. Yeah.
which was a fantastic show. And I don't know where it is at the minute, but wherever it is in the world, if you live close to it, I definitely recommend checking out Star Wars Identities. But they had all of these sort of all of these molds of the pod racer drivers made up.
Uh-huh.
And the detail is exquisite, and it's pretty much like the designs there that obviously then do create
Right.
in a computer, but all that work and design work and like physical stuff was all done on a lot of these things, and again, like, it is like top notch, like some of the best designers in the world working on this stuff with the best imaginations in the world.
Definitely. Yeah, and it's really incredible. I love to see that stuff up close because it is just these incredible artists all working together, all within like one person's vision. But without, like, George Lucas could say that, but then, even going back to the original trilogy without, Ralph McQuarrie and Joe Johnston and Colin Cantwell and Nilo, and then moving to the prequels with all these incredible artists again, bringing it to life and making it just like so lifelike and so like you're looking at it now and you're like, yes, that's iconic, but it takes a lot of work to make something iconic, period. And the fact that we can look at any, like you're saying, pod racer or alien or senator that was in the background and know exactly who they are and what they're from is really, really incredible.
I think one of the cool things that was on display at that Star Wars Identities exhibition was they had the sort of the Jabba eyes and lips, but sort of
Mm-hmm.
the rest of the face had like disintegrated, sadly.
Right.
Um, but like the puppeteer and stuff there from Return of the Jedi was really cool to see as well.
Yeah.
Again, sort of showing the sort of the physical aspect of pulling these characters off. I think another thing about, you mentioned the sort of the prequel documentaries, and like I remember getting the prequel DVDs, the 2 disc sets, and the level of like behind the scenes content on them was sort of unheard of, never been seen before. And I really do think that influenced Lord of the Rings extended cuts, where you had the sort of the appendices discs, which again is a very, very high level of behind the scenes content. But for me, I think what those documentaries did is, so someone like Doug Chang, like I had no idea who that was, but then obviously watching these DVDs, so I just realised that when I watched that in Malton interviews, I was probably 12 or 13. I watched those before the special editions, so I was probably only maybe 8 or 9. And then obviously the prequels came out when I was about 12 or 13, and obviously getting those DVDs and sort of seeing this behind the scenes and seeing Doug Chang on set and like getting sort of knew his name now just from consuming this awesome documentary, which I didn't want to know his name or set out to know his name, but it was in my head now. And then when I went to my first celebration in 2015 in London, like bumped into Doug Chang on the concourse. I managed to get a picture with him, but I was just like, I was obviously quite excited to meet him, and he did seem a bit like taken aback. I think there wasn't many like at Celebration London. I think like there was a lot of people there who sort of weren't inside the bubble. So I think like, for example, I bumped into Dave Filoni, the same convention, and like he didn't really have anyone around him. Like one or two people noticed him and went and spoke to him, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Where obviously very different to American conventions. But you could see Doug Chang was a bit like, oh, like this guy is very seems very excited to meet us for like no apparent reason, but it was just because it was like, like 15, 17 years ago, I watched this documentary and like, I know exactly who you are. Like, like, do you know what I mean? The excitement was like quite strange, but really awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there a documentary that you would recommend sort of everyone to go to and watch to sort of dive into the Star Wars making ofs? Like say the Star Wars fans who haven't done that yet, where would you recommend them to start?
So, I mean, it depends on obviously what you love, right? If you love the sequel trilogy, go watch Striker and the Jedi, which I think is probably the most stripped down, honest documentary that's been made. No matter what your feelings of The Last Jedi are, it really is just like a fantastic documentary. But if you wanted to kind of take a step back and kind of see the history of these documentaries, one that is not as readily available or as readily seen, especially by the newer generation, which is I am part of, is Classic Creatures, which they made surrounding Return of the Jedi. And it is so much fun. It's just like a fun documentary, and that's where so much of the, like what you're saying, the tactile, like Jabba the Hutt puppeteering comes from. And they kind of like tell a story, and it's kind of weird. It's hosted by Carrie Fisher and by Billy D. Williams, and it's just like so much fun to watch. I think it's on YouTube. It might be on Disney Plus in some countries, but it really is. Classic Creatures is probably one of the best, if not just because it's like so weird, and it's so much fun to see everyone with just the original trilogy and like Return of the Jedi being the capstone to the end of Star Wars, right? And it's really, really cool seeing all those aliens kind of fleshed out even more.
I think, as you mentioned before about George sort of having one eye on letting people in, I think like Lucasfilm seem to always have an eye on sort of producing this kind of media. Almost if they want us to find the wizard behind the curtain, so to speak. When you think about that, like it's actually probably one of the most cleverest things they ever did, because you've got these stories, these movies that everyone loves, and then from an early time you're sort of showing them how these are made, and it just, I think it breeds sort of more love and affection for it. And because I know sort of how things were done and the hardships that people went through and the sort of the skills that people had to make these movies. It almost makes you feel like you know these people. So it makes you connect more to Star Wars. And I think that's like one of the reasons why, it's over 40 years later, we've got a podcast now talking about Star Wars when this movie came out over 40 years ago. You've got a podcast that's dedicated like solely to interviewing sort of cast and crew and sort of getting all these behind the scenes tidbits from them and what it was like making it. Like, I think without Lucasfilm, and obviously now Disney sort of letting you peer behind the curtain and letting you connect to all this stuff behind the scenes, like, I don't think it would resonate as much.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that's why they did it. I can imagine George doing it just because he wanted to give back to filmmakers. Like, oh look, this is how we make these movies.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to watch this and be inspired, like I was inspired when I was a young boy, then here's the inspiration you need, type of thing. But yeah, like, do you think it does bring us closer to the Star Wars universe? Even though it's weird because I almost associate it to professional wrestling. Where, you have professional wrestling, and then sort of in the late 90s, early 2000s, which is also when you have the big wrestling boom. The second one, the first one was in the 80s, and wrestling becomes the biggest thing on the planet in the late 90s, early 2000s. You also have the internet, which exposes wrestling at the same time as being predetermined. But even that wasn't enough to stop the wrestling hype, and then even today, wrestling's still like a huge thing across the world. Even though you could say it has been exposed by the internet as being predetermined now, but like, and it's fans have changed from being sort of buying into the story to now fans who understand how the story works. And I think obviously you've got fans of this absolutely fantastic myth and lore and rich story. And then with this behind the scenes stuff, I think it brings us even closer because now it's like, oh, well, here's what influenced the story. Here's how we made it. Here's how these movies were impossible, but then we made it possible. And then here's how this has influenced everything else that's came after it in the world of cinema. So I think it does bring like the fan base closer into the story, even though it sort of exposes the story a little bit.
I mean, definitely. And I think your wrestling analogy is spot on, right? Your love for wrestling doesn't get diminished by knowing who the people are, behind the costume or what storylines or who's writing the storylines or what kind of the plan is. It kind of just elevates your involvement and your love. And Star Wars is the exact same way, where even the pieces of Star Wars that maybe I don't connect with immediately, or maybe that I'm not the biggest fan of at outset, by seeing the documentary footage or by reading the books or by knowing who works on it, or in my case, very luckily, like being able to talk to a lot of the people that worked on it, you come to understand that the things that we love, especially in pop culture and in media, are because of so many people, right? And they're all working their hardest and they're all doing the best job that they can. They're all just immensely talented, and all of that combined just really adds a whole new layer to what you're consuming, whether Star Wars or not, and really does help kind of uh, add to your enjoyment, because you know how hard someone worked on this, you know how much joy it brought them and what they were trying to do, and at the end of it, like, it is kind of compiled into a 2.5 hour movie that deserves to be celebrated, right? Every movie really is a miracle in itself, and then it's a miracle on top of that it's good or groundbreaking in any way. And so by having especially these documentaries or these books to chronicle that for something that I love so much, it really is astounding that we're getting that. And you mentioned earlier Lord of the Rings, also just, it's such a joy and a blessing to like be able to like revisit those things and see it with new eyes and kind of experience something that maybe you've seen 100 times, but see it being created in a very intimate way. And it is just kind of a gift, really.
You mentioned books there. Obviously, there is some fantastic sort of making of behind the scenes books that again start with the original trilogy. What's some of your favorite books that are sort of in the medium?
Yeah. I mean, of course, the recent show stack art of books, I will always they're so great, and they're really, I mean, for the quality and the just the heft of it, like the price is also very good, and of course Phil does an incredible job of kind of cataloging these artists and what we were just talking about, these incredible creative minds coming together. So I always recommend those. But if you wanted to kind of, like we were saying with classic creatures, if you wanted to go back a little bit, especially with accessibility, the Rinsler books, the J.W. Rinsler Making of Star Wars, Empire and Jedi books, are all just fantastic resources. And actually, I've been using them a lot digitally. I own the physical copies, but I know those are out of print now or harder to find. But the digital copies, especially the ones that you can get for your iPad or Kindle, are especially mastered for the iPad, and have exclusive audio and video that are not in the physical book. And you can often get them for like $6. And they are just such an incredible resource. And then, like, me and researching for guests or for articles or whatever it is, they have an incredible like find and replace feature that I can just kind of search anyone's name and it'll kind of pop up for me, which is wonderful. And then if you even go back further than that, there are two books from the 80s. One is easy to find, one is not so easy to find. The easy to find one, that is not an official Lucasfilm book, actually, but is probably the closest thing that we will ever get to a George Lucas autobiography, um, is Skywalking by Dave Pollock, which was written initially while they were filming and editing Return of the Jedi in that time period. So Marsha Lucas is still in the picture, which is very interesting because after that, it's completely scrubbed out. But it's a very fascinating look at his life, and it's just a biography of George Lucas. So I really highly recommend that, and you can find that pretty easily at secondhand shops now. And then the other one is the Once Upon a Galaxy, which is the making of Empire Strikes Back book, which is very hard to find at this point. I'm sure there's PDFs on it online, but like for instance, Ryan Johnson had it on set with him at all times as a reference, and there are some quotes from Last Jedi that are pulled specifically out of quotes that he finds from Irvin Kershner or Lawrence Kasdan or whatever it may be. So I know that was a little bit long of a list, but those hopefully are a couple that maybe people have not checked out yet.
Yeah, I love the art of books. I've got The Last Jedi and I've got Force Awakens. I still need to pick up The Rise of Skywalker. I think that sort of came out during sort of the pandemic that we're in at the minute, so
Right.
that's why I haven't been able to pick that up. For Christmas, I did get the Star Wars Archives produced by
Oh my
Cat,
gosh. Yeah.
written by Paul Duncan.
Paul Duncan.
So I've got the episodes 4 to 6. That's the 1977 and 1983 archives,
Mm-hmm.
and I've just got the smaller version. Obviously, I know they do a big copybook version.
Right.
So I've got the slightly smaller version. I mean, it's still a good size, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I've not had a huge dive in yet, but just looking at the amount of detail and the lovely, colourful pictures of like sort of behind the scenes and on set, it does look absolutely fantastic.
That's a great one. I'm glad you brought that one up because yeah, I have the big versions of both the prequel and the original trilogy books, but those are very cost prohibitive. And what you're describing, the small version, is beautiful and incredible. And like you said, has a nice heft, is beautifully bound, has pretty much the entirety of the actual big book with maybe a few excerpts removed. And it's also $25 or something, like it, as opposed to a $200 price tag. And really the crux of that book, of both books, because I was able to talk to Mr. Duncan, who was wonderful, and he was able to interview George Lucas recently about everything. And it's like the first kind of in-depth post Disney sequel interviews that we've had with George, kind of going back through his entire filmography. And they are really just fascinating to kind of go through. And like you said, also the pictures and the art that are chosen, a lot of which I'd never seen before. And so that's always a nice treat as well.
Yeah, I think obviously when you're sort of as inside the bubble as much as we are, I think it tends to get it to a point where we've sort of seen everything, or so we think. But then it's great when new things come along that like we haven't seen before and we can experience for the first time, and we do get to sort of have our minds blown all over again.
Right.
Obviously, we've mentioned we've mentioned sort of the original trilogy and how we started putting things on the VHSs, and sort of those making of books that came out. What's your sort of favorite era of behind the scenes content? For me, I feel that I think the prequel era was the best era for the amount and also the quality of the behind the scenes content we got.
I agree. I agree with the prequel era 100% because, like you said, it was just like I was growing up learning how to use the internet so that I could log on to StarWars.com and like see all this crazy stuff that they were pushing out, starting with the prequels or starting with the Phantom Menace, rather. Like there was Lynn's Diaries, there were the webisodes, and then of course they would kind of move forward with Attack of the Clones. They had the Ahmed Best on location. They had these weird kind of like special looks, and they had webisodes as well. And then you move to Revenge of the Sith with the Hyperspace Fan Club, and they had the webcam on set at all times, like just the craziest things. And then, of course, they were supplemented by then we would get the in-depth look on the DVD and in Star Wars Insider, and it really was just kind of a golden age. And I'm so glad I got to kind of grow up during that because I knew, like what you're saying, I knew Doug Chang's name and John Knoll's name and all these people just like the back of my hand, because it was like, yes, of course Rob Coleman is animating Yoda. Yes, of course, I know who that is. And it really kind of created rock stars for me, while also delivering, just like, again, like we said at the beginning, like an inside firsthand look at like the evolution of movies in real time. And I don't think anything will ever be able to capture that ever again, because with Marvel movies now, or with Star Wars movies now, everything is so secretive that I don't think we'll ever get kind of that level of in the moment, in the now, behind the scenes looks even before the movie comes out.
I remember being at comprehensive school, which is sort of high school over in the US, and I think I was 15 in English literature class, and we had to write sort of an essay on our favorite movies, and sort of it was quite broad. You could sort of do whatever aspect of movies you wanted. And I remember like one of my friends, for example, didn't do it, and the night before, sort of, he wrote the back of the Fast and the Furious movies, like the synopsis of the back of the movie, like onto a bit of paper, and handed that in. I think at the time there was only 2 or 3 of those out. But I remember mine being like, I'm sure it was like 8 to 12 pages long. Obviously about Star Wars and about how George Lucas changed cinema. And I remember sort of getting it back in my teacher being like, how do you know like everything you're putting in here about like for example stop motion animation, how that was used like during that opening sequence? And I was just like, well, I just do, like, I've consumed so much media over the last like decade that like all these facts, and because they're so fun to learn and I really love it, like it's not really a chore to learn. I just take it in. And she was like, okay, because she was like, I don't know if like this is true, and I was like, well, it is, like, but I don't know what you mean, but I know because I consumed the media that told us that this was true. But that always was a fond memory. Going back to obviously this sort of new era that we're in now, Disney era. I was a little bit disappointed with sort of the lack of behind the scenes content and making of content on the Force Awakens DVD. I even bought that 3D special edition to get the extra.
Right, because the audio commentary, you're like, come on, give me something.
Yeah. And I don't know, I almost felt like, George has sort of left the company at this point. Do the people in charge now care too much about doing that? Like, they probably care more about putting out awesome product to begin with, if that makes sense, like getting the movie right and getting the movie out, and the movie being the movie they want. And they're probably not looking to sort of influence the filmmakers of the future like George was. Obviously, Last Jedi was very different. I thought we got like a lot more, still not as much as the prequels, but I thought we got a lot more on that Last Jedi Blu-ray making of wise than we did on Force Awakens. And I think that's mainly because of the type of filmmaker Rian Johnson is.
I agree. Yeah, go ahead.
And as you were saying about the Derek and the Jedi, like obviously documentary made during the making of the Last Jedi. I'm pretty sure reading that documentary itself sort of went around the world, sort of entering competitions and getting screened as a separate documentary. And I remember Mark Hamill and Rian Johnson being there for like Q&As afterwards in certain places. So just go to show us how important these documentaries can be when they put the time and effort into making them.
Definitely. And I mean, yes, it was a big bummer, especially with The Force Awakens, because of the drama that was on set. Of course, like the J.W. Rinsler book got canceled, the making of Force Awakens. So then only the art of Force Awakens came out. And that kind of set, I wouldn't say a bad tradition, but a tradition that would be the only behind the scenes book coming out surrounding the future releases. And then, like you mentioned, with The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson grew up like us and consuming all this behind the scenes content and knowing how valuable it is and how important it is to catalog that. And every single one of his movies, he went above and beyond with behind the scenes content and capturing the process. And, if you go to his website, he has all of his scripts besides Last Jedi readily available for people. Like, he was a big believer in that process. And of course, then with Director of the Jedi being so honest, right? And it really is just a really incredible look at the relationship between Mark Hamill and Rian Johnson, and kind of that evolution of Luke's character that so many people didn't enjoy. But I think the documentary really lays it out bare. It really is just kind of an incredible piece that we got during this Disney era where maybe we were not used to so much access. And then, like you mentioned, because it actually premiered in Texas, where I live. It premiered in Austin, and at a film festival. And I was at that festival a week before for work, and I had driven back to Dallas because it was in Austin. And so that's probably 4-hour drive. And I'd driven back so I could go to work. And one of my vendors texts me and he's like, "Hey, you're a big Star Wars fan, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, they are releasing like a new Star Wars movie or something, but they're going to have a couple of the cast or crew or something. And then after it's premiering, they're coming to our event for a Q&A." Like, because they just kind of made the round throughout South by Southwest at all the different little vendors. So this was for Twitter. And I was like, who exactly are these cast and crew? He's like, "Well, let me look." He's like, it's Ram Bergman and Rian Johnson and Mark Hamill. And I was like, all right. So I took the day off work. I drove down in the middle of the night, slept in my car, and then just like I had a ticket. So I was front row, and there was probably 20 people there. And it was incredible because it was, not only was it an incredible documentary, but then being able to like hear Rian Johnson and Mark Hamill in person talk, and literally they were like just like looking me in the eye talking, and I got to meet Ryan and Ram afterwards, and it really was just like an incredible experience. And I think, me gushing about Director and the Jedi maybe is influenced by that experience, but I really do think of all the documentaries we've gotten over the past 20 years, it really is very high up there.
No, definitely. That sounds awesome. And the intimate nature of that experience sounds absolutely fantastic.
It really was just like a dream come true. Like that will never be topped, I don't think. A wild, wild time.
Do you think, obviously, we've hinted there sort of the problems with the Force Awakens production, although probably seem minor compared to every more recent ones.
Right.
Obviously, The Last Jedi does almost seem to be like, the company loved the script. They loved Ryan's pitch. Ryan then delivered exactly what he said he was going to do.
Right.
And I know it got sort of mixed reviews from the public, but I think as a filmmaking experience, I think the company loved it and it sort of went perfect. Obviously, off the back of that, we had sort of Solo
Right.
where we have big issues enough where we fire the directors publicly, and then we have Rise of Skywalker where we have one director who's wrote one movie and then he leaves, and then we bring in someone else to write a new episode 9, a completely different story.
Right.
Do you think that those sort of negative experiences will have an effect on the amount of sort of future behind the scenes making of content coming from the company, for movies anyway, at least?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm interested because I do think we will eventually get these stories. Is the thing we know them already. Like we know these stories already. We know that Lord and Miller were fired because it was a little too improv-y on the Solo set, and Lawrence Kasdan was getting upset. We know all these stories. I'm interested to see what Lucasfilm does publicly in the future once these wounds are a little more healed and things have kind of moved on a little bit more. Like with the 10th anniversary of Force Awakens, not too far off, really. I wonder if we will finally get a making of Force Awakens book that kind of goes into the nitty gritty a little bit, goes into the Harrison Ford on set injury, goes into the reshoots that happened, or goes into the rewrites that had to happen during that time that made the movie stronger. I think that's a definite possibility. I think as we move into the next years of Star Wars, I think more and more people will begin to tell the story anyway, right? Lord and Miller on the press tour for Into the Spider-Verse 2 will start telling solo stories, and Lucasfilm especially will be like, wait a second, let's control the narrative a little bit. Let's tell the story and make sure that we can at least maybe not like what's the word? Maybe not like edit it or parse it out, but at least so they know everything that's going to be said. And I can see books like that or articles like that or featurettes like that come out um, in the future. Maybe not next year, maybe not in 5 years, but soon, especially as these wounds heal. Because I think, again, we know all these stories. I think it'd be very interesting to kind of get this nitty gritty because everything else has been pretty much uncovered, right? If you look at the original trilogy, if you look at the prequels, there are no secrets anymore for the making of those movies, both the good and the bad, right? The things that we know, maybe that were terrible, or the things on set that maybe caused frustrations. We know all of that now, and it's only going to take that amount of time for us to get it for these new Disney movies. And I could see Disney just kind of biting the bullet and doing it themselves as opposed to it leaking out slowly over time from people's autobiographies and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously we've seen sort of the Colin Trevorrow script for Duel of the
Right.
Fates that was going to be his episode 9 sort of leak, um, which I'm not quite sure where that leaked from. I think he said it wasn't, he didn't leak it, but he said it is legitimate, I think is what he said. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously the Lord and Miller thing, I've got a feeling that those guys, because I think they got paid, so I imagine they've had to sign a big NDA saying like, here's your payment, you cannot speak about this, like otherwise you give them the money back, type of thing. But I think, yeah, I think we haven't touched on Rogue One. Obviously, Rogue One did have issues,
Right.
but it was almost handled very differently to Solo, where some reshoots were done. Sort of, we don't know the full extent of it. We think Tony Gilroy's being directing those, but Gareth has come back and he's done the Vader scene for the end of the movie, and
Right.
done all the press and sort of been a team player almost, so to speak. And so that plays up a bit differently than like the Solo situation where it's like, these guys have had to leave the project and like we've had to announce we've replaced the director, type of thing.
Right.
Um, but for me, I hope it doesn't stop behind the scenes content coming. But I think like it already has. As you've already said, they've cancelled those behind the scenes books from the Force Awakens from the off after some problems. The Art of Rise of Skywalker, we didn't get it for like a long time. That release of the Rise of Skywalker on Blu-ray, no deleted scenes at all. I think it all ties into sort of the issues they've had on the back end
Right.
of the first 5 years of making Star Wars movies under the Disney umbrella. But look at the Star Wars that's been it's all been a success, But I think if you look at the Star Wars, that's been sort of an outstanding success, both monetarily and critically, and with the fans. The Mandalorian, we obviously got sort of the 8-episode making of series for Disney Plus, which was absolutely fantastic. Obviously, we only got the one episode for season 2, but I do honestly believe that's due to COVID and we can't bring everybody in for roundtables because it's not safe.
Right.
How did you feel about the gallery series?
Oh, I loved it. And like you said, those 8 episodes for the first season were just such a delight, right? Because there's been part of me, I wonder this is separate. What time does Mandalorian normally come on for you? What time do you try to watch it at least?
So this is so the first season, Disney Plus was not available in the UK.
Oh, right.
So I watched those by different means.
Right, we won't talk about that.
Don't really don't want to have to do that, and the room I'm sitting in now,
Right.
probably
Probably
£10,000 spent on merch. I pour a lot of money into that.
Yeah.
And but it just was not available, and it was
Yeah.
spoilers everyone was chatting about straight away, and then the actual Star Wars marketing team after 3 weeks were talking about stuff. So it was I'm glad I made that decision, because I would have had, for example, I would have had the child spoil for us.
Yeah.
Where I didn't. I got to experience that in the moment, which was absolutely wonderful. But for season 2, Disney Plus was here in the UK, which was fantastic. And it aired on the mornings. I think I can't remember exactly what time now. Maybe 6 a.m. Between 6 and 8 a.m. I think.
Okay. So all I'm trying to say is really, because every morning I would wake up early before work, rush to my TV and watch it as soon as I possibly could, right? So it became a routine, and it really, I'm interested to see if they do the same thing with Bad Batch, and as we kind of move through this, because it really was kind of a fun way to experience Star Wars, right? Cup of coffee, you're excited. What a great way to start your day. And so, of course, season 1 Mandalorian ends, and then immediately the gallery show starts with the same exact kind of thing. I was able to have another 8 weeks of waking up and watching new Star Wars and enjoying it, and even more so enjoying the kind of content that I really love, which is the behind the scenes. And so, yeah, gallery, especially that first season, was such a joy to watch. Of course, I'm bummed that the season 2 of gallery was only an episode. I'm glad to see at least them understand the need to have it, right? We just saw it with Marvel Assembled for WandaVision, and that's their plan moving forward as well. So we know that they care, and they know that people are watching it. So I'm interested, if season 3 happens, if maybe they go back to the 8 episodes, because there won't be, hopefully, COVID restrictions in place, and they can kind of expand on it more. Of course, season 2 of gallery didn't even touch on Luke and how they brought him to life, so I'm sure that we'll see that in some official capacity at some point. I keep holding out that they're going to do a physical release of the Mandalorian, which would be there's part of me that's stupid to buy that branding, because it will always be on Disney Plus. But the other part of me, like you said, the 10,000 pounds, I'll probably just buy it anyway. So but I wonder if they'll have exclusive bonus features if that ever does come to pass. So all that to be said, I loved gallery. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, definitely. And I think gallery stems from the same sort of creative juices that flowed from sort of Dave Filoni's team, the Rebels Recon,
Right.
sort of the internet show on YouTube that was after every episode of Rebels. There would be a Rebels Recon where they would sort of talk about the story that we'd just watched. So I think some of that comes from sort of Dave Filoni, and Dave Filoni being obviously the guy who learned from George what sort of how to sort of tell stories, and also how to sort of not run the business, but also what matters, if that makes sense. Obviously, you had Rebels Recon, you had I can't remember what the Clone Wars one was called, but there was a Clone Wars one as well. That aired alongside season 7 on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, probably one of my favorite documentary moments in the last 5 years has been Rebels Recon. I just love tuning into that. I'd watch the episode, then watch Rebels Recon.
Uh-huh.
And it was just like, it wasn't too long. Obviously, the episode's only 22 minutes of the animation anyway. But you got some really cool tidbits in there, and got to meet the cast and crew, which was awesome.
Right.
Sort of, do you have a favorite piece of like behind the scenes merchandise? Like, obviously, for example, I know the cast and crew, for example, often get their own. Each department usually has their own T-shirts, caps, hoodies, that types of things.
Right.
So do you own anything from like directly from set up used by the teams?
So me personally owning, yeah, I have a few things from the different movies. Most recently, the Disney movies have been a little bit easier to get, a shirt or a patch or a vest from. And so I've been slowly building up that collection. And then there are, of course, things that like are on my eBay watch list, or things that like I really shouldn't grab but are really really tempting. For instance, this is not Star Wars but very close. The Indiana Jones, there's a cast and crew cap, a Raiders of the Lost Ark cap that is iconic to me at least, but like Spielberg wears it a ton. It's kind of a tan with a big patch on it. Howard Kazanjian wears it pretty much every day in all of the set photos. And they're relatively available. Uh, but like, it's like, am I about to spend $1,000 on a hat that I'll never wear? I don't know. So, that's kind of like the next evolution of how I've been collecting more recently, right? Which is, if anyone follows me on Twitter, it's let me buy the things that are a little bit more elusive or a little bit more exclusive to the people that actually worked on the movies. And that also makes me feel a little bit closer to those movies as well. And then there's part of me that also just loves a little bit more attainably the things that they've made over the years that directly reference or that are inspired by the concept art or the behind the scenes stories that we've all grown to love, right? So I have a Blue Harvest director's chair that Real Robot put out. They also put out an incredible Jabba the Hutt maquette that is based off of one scene in Classic Creatures documentary of one of Phil Tippett's early concepts for Jabba the Hutt. Gentle Giant has done a really great line of concept mini busts of McCory's sketches and illustrations for the characters, and I have 7 or 8 of those. And then I love, they did the action figures as well, the McCory action figures back in the day. So all of that, again, to tangibly kind of feel like you're somewhat part of it, or you're at least somewhat connected to that story that's been told over the past 40 years, is something that kind of is consistent throughout all of my collecting at this point.
Is there a holy grail Star Wars item that you need but don't have yet?
That's tough. So the Raiders hat definitely is very, very high up there. There's also, this is actually not that hard to get, and I really should just pull the trigger. They do make the crew hats for Last Jedi when it was called Space Bear. And so it's a big panda bear on the hat. I think that's really cool. And I just need to pull the trigger on that at some point. Let me think. What else is like a holy grail? There's also, there's just a ton of t-shirts that the crew would wear, especially during the original trilogy, that are all relatively attainable. When I say that, it means like $250 to $500, which to me is like, I'm not going to spend that unless it's like, the most special occasion of all time, right? Because I feel very guilty when I spend anything over $50 anyway. But there's a few of those that I really do love, because the art is really cool, because Joe Johnston designed it or Ken Ralston designed it or something like that, and they're funny and they're making fun of the process. And then I'm kind of just always on the hunt for cool things that at least I find and get a kick out of. One of the things, it's not cast and crew, but George wore it on set one day, is the Yoda hat. I'm always on the lookout for it's, and they reproduced it for one of the celebrations, but I'm always on the hunt for the original, which is just a ball cap and in bright bold. It just says Yoda on the front, and then it has 2 green plush ears sticking out of it. And George wore it to the shoot for the final Endor celebration. And I'm like, I just want that hat so bad. So one of these days, I'll get that
Yeah, no, that hat sounds wonderful.
hat.
Especially the connection to George as well. I think George is like really funny. I think he has like quite a dry sense of humor, but I think like
Oh yeah.
some people take him too seriously. Where I think sometimes he's winding people up. But I think when he wears things like a hat like that, like you know, he's a fun guy.
Oh yeah. I think you said it best. I think he has a very, very dry sense of humor. And it is just kind of like you have to be able to understand that, because I think a lot of people take him very, very seriously. And of course, he's a very serious person and he's a genius. But I think the heart of Star Wars is the humor and is the joy, and that comes directly from George. And without that, you really don't have Star Wars as we know it or as we like it.
No, definitely. And then I also think you wouldn't have without George. You know, modern cinema would not be where it is at without George Lucas. You know, you wouldn't have franchises and blockbusters without to the level we do without George and Star Wars being successful. Then also, just if you look at like George Lucas is the guy who, he started Pixar animation. He did sell it, but like without him starting it, you wouldn't have all of these Pixar movies that win all of these awards and are a big sort of huge foundation of the Disney company now. ILM, look at the amount of movies ILM works on. Like all the visual effects in the Marvel Cinematic Universe are all done by ILM. Pirates of the Caribbean, ILM. Transformers, ILM. Every movie you can think of, ILM.
Yeah, right.
Think of like the movie makers now who are like, your Ryan Johnsons, Christopher Nolan, another big one, influenced by George Lucas a lot. It comes to something when even on a Joe Rogan podcast, you had Kanye West referring to Star Wars and the hero's journey.
Right.
George has even influenced these people who you wouldn't even think he would influence. I've got like a running joke sort of in my family where like I do like to promote that. Like, I'll go, without George Lucas, modern cinema would not be where it is. And they tend to laugh, and something will happen on screen. I'll be, this ties into Lucasfilm that way. And I was watching it was a Taylor Swift documentary. I think it was Miss Americana. And it finished, and the credits were rolling. I was just getting a drink, and come back around, and on the telly it was like post-production sound services by Skywalker Sound, Marin County, California. So like screenshot it quickly and sent it to my sister in like a group chat with my sister and my fiance, and I was like, see, without George we wouldn't be getting this lovely sound.
You didn't get Miss Americana.
Yeah,
I agree.
So it was like that's to like a joke and extent, but like it does go to show just like just how much he has influenced
Definitely
the world. I think one of my favorite things I learned from behind the scenes was Phantom Menace was going to be the first digital release in cinemas, but cinemas weren't up to code, so he then started the sort of the THX initiative to sort of get them up to code and to help cinemas switch to digital, ready for Attack of the Clones, which then did become the first fully digital release. Which I think people,
really, really incredible.
Yeah, I think people are like print's better. Print might look better for artistic reasons. People choose print, but going digital, it streamlines the filmmaking process a lot. It makes it cheaper. It streamlines it for the cinema chains. It makes it cheaper for them to show the movies. So overall, like his decision to go digital was to sort of be able to, work more efficiently. Being able to watch like dailies back straight away. You can watch it like on the monitor as you're going. If you've got it, if you haven't. And also like, to reduce costs within the cinema industry, make it easier for younger filmmakers. You talk about the move to digital.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that would have an effect on you can make a movie on your iPhone now, But like, had George not pushed the boundaries for digital cinema in the mid '90s, like, would we be as far along as we are technology wise? Like, maybe not. And George could see that, like, where, like, we're going to make this digital because in the future, I think George could see, kids are going to be able to go out there and make movies on handheld devices, like, really quick, and they'll just have a vision, and if they've got the imagination, they'll have the tools to go and do it. I think George was all about making things accessible rather than, you have to go to film school for X amount of years and you have to get backed by a studio, which, is one of the hardest things you can do. It's one of the reasons why George sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of, he did not like dealing with the studios because of the way they treated him in the past, and so he became a studio. If that makes sense. But yeah, so I think George deserves a lot of credit, and for me, I think, I don't know if he's had one yet. I don't think he has, but like, lifetime achievement awards should be coming his way while he's alive, hopefully, because I think he fully deserves it, and he has transcended not just cinema, but he's also transcended modern technology and modern storytelling.
Definitely. And actually, I mean, because I agree, I think give George Lucas every single award for lifetime achievement. There was a period where, again, it was the height of prequels and me being just like so invested in everything. And the AFI, the American Film Institute, so I don't know if you were able to watch it, but they're all online now, in successive years celebrated a Lifetime Achievement Award for Steven Spielberg, and then the next year I think it was Harrison Ford, and then it was George Lucas, and then it was John Williams. And all four of them are just like the most incredible. They're like 2 hours long. They were on cable TV, and they're so wonderful. And it's Carrie Fisher getting up and making fun of George, and it is just so much fun to be able to watch that now, and see him at least get some recognition, but also see everyone that he has worked with really, really celebrate him. And so for people listening, or if you haven't seen it, definitely type it AFI George Lucas and just sit there for 2 hours, because it is so wonderful.
Oh, well, I've got a list of 3 things now. I've got Skywalking by Dave Pollack. I've got Once Upon a Galaxy, and I've got AFI docs written on this post-it note, so I can go
Love
and
it. Love it. Yeah.
Things.
2 of those are going to be very accessible for you. Once Upon a Galaxy will be very tough, and so I apologize in advance. It is 100% worth it. I have found great success in used bookstores finding it for $1. So please, like, everyone listening, especially, like, I will sing the praises of this book forever, because it is just fascinating and really just like Star Wars boiled down to its core. But people are charging like $200 on eBay for it, and don't do that. So whenever because I've found like 5 copies, and I always just try to give them away. I'm always like, please take this, because anyway. But all of it is so good to read and kind of immerse yourself in, for sure.
And I think one area we haven't spoke about, obviously, we spoke about the books, we spoke about the documentaries. Obviously, another big thing, especially with the sort of expansion of conventions in the last sort of 10 years, and how popular they've become. Obviously, you now have sort of, Lucasfilm presenting, not only do they present panels at worldwide conventions, San Diego Comic-Con, that type of thing, New York Comic-Con.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Star Wars Celebration itself, the Lucasfilm's own convention, obviously has a lot of Star Wars panels, and a lot of those are based on behind the scenes, and they'll have some dedicated to sort of creature characters and how those are made. They'll have some dedicated to sort of animation teams, and how that's done. Do you think that sort of changed the game in sort of like, yeah, you can get all these cool documentaries and read these books, which are awesome, but now also if you come to this convention, you can see these people speaking about in person, like, what they're so passionate about and what they do, and sometimes they'll have some of the effects on stage for you to see, some of the creatures on there to see and see how it works. And do you think that's sort of a game changer in sort of interacting with us as fans?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think conventions have been such an integral part of my fandom, and I'm sure your fandom as well, and being able to be there in person and then also be able to just watch it on YouTube, for instance, the Thrawn reveal, I believe was Celebration Europe, and so I was not able to attend. Maybe Celebration London, and so seeing that all and being able to participate in a global community now is just so wonderful. And like you're saying, the biggest joys that I have found are these panels with these people that I admire, all kind of reminiscing and all kind of telling the stories in a way that can at least be cataloged and appreciated. And yeah, I'm excited for conventions to start back up again. I really miss them, as sweaty and as smelly as they can be, because there's some truly magical things that can happen there.
Yeah, I was in the Rebels panel
Oh,
in
that's great.
London for the throne reveal, which was it was almost like, I've never read Hate the Empire, but
Mhm.
also I know who Throne is, and I was sitting next to my cousin who was older than me. My cousin's the one who actually got me into Star Wars. Obviously, he was around for like the original trilogy. I started watching it sort of on his VHSs in between original trilogy and special editions. Um, and sort of Hate the Empire was very important to him, because those were what he had. Like Star Wars had finished and there was nothing there, and then those books came out. So I mean, I was really excited when they announced Thrawn in the room, because it was like I knew who he was, and the fact he's coming to Rebels again
Uh-huh.
was almost like the Forbidden Door was like, we're bringing these characters
Yeah.
in now. Who else can come in? And then obviously, being there for Anna, my cousin, like how much he felt, because it was like, oh, they're bringing this big part of my past like into this here. So he was really excited, and like the atmosphere got like sucked out the room when they announced Thrawn, and then like got put back in like 100 times more intense. That makes sense. In
Uh-huh.
a good way. It was very lively. It went very quiet all of a sudden. Like the atmosphere was dead for a moment, and the moment felt like forever. And then all of a sudden, like click your fingers, it was back in a high intensity. And then when they actually brought on, actually had Timothy Zahn come on and just do a little.
Mhm.
He was writing the book. They announced that in the same panel. So that was like a double hit craziness, which was great. And like I said, like it's, speaking of conventions, like I love conventions. So like I was at Celebration Orlando, um,
Mhm.
and I was at the Hasbro booth, and I think for the first day I saw they had this sort of glass case that was empty, and it was like announcing this figure later on. And then the next day I was going through the Hasbro booth, and the glass case was full, and I had it was the Black Series convention exclusive Thrawn figure,
Mm.
and I was like, oh my god, it's Thrawn! Like that's what the figure is. I remember like being so taken aback by it
Right.
that I was sort of looking at the box still while walking away, and I bumped into a man, and I knocked the man over. So luckily he didn't fall over. He just sort of stumbled a bit. I stumbled a bit. Was sort of got myself steady. I apologised. I looked up, and before I realised, the man I had almost knocked over was Timothy Zahn himself, and he'd come down for like the
That's
reveal of the
great.
figure. And I was like, oh, like, sorry, I was looking at the figure. And I looked at the figure and I looked back at him. And I was like, oh, like, yeah, that's your figure. And he was like, you could see he was a bit like, he found it a little bit funny, but you could tell he's a bit like, right, it's time to move on now. And I was like, that's you, and then that's the figure. And like, oh, I'm sorry, knocked you over, but like, oh, like it looks cool, doesn't it? And he was like, yes, it does. But yeah, so that was quite a cool sort of story to do with Thrawn as well. Like the next convention, the next celebration, sort of Thrawn ran at the next one for a good experience for me as well. So yeah, definitely agree with you about conventions, and like I said, hopefully we get them back soon. Is there what's one
Definitely.
of your favorite moments of like interviewing a cast and crew member for your podcast, Talking Bay 94?
I mean, there's so many. I mean, while we're on the Thrawn subject, one of my favorites still is getting to interview Timothy Zahn. It was at San Diego Comic-Con. It was pretty early on in the show, and I grew up reading his books, and he was one of my favorite authors, and I had never been able to meet him. And I kind of reached out to a local bookstore who was hosting him the next week after Comic-Con. I was like, hey, I'd love to help promote. And they hooked me up with Del Rey, and I went behind the booth at Del Rey at San Diego Comic Con, and it was just me and my producer Timothy Zahn and Timothy Zahn's wife, and it was incredible. And just 30 minutes, and we got to talk about everything. And that still is just one of my favorite memories. Even at Celebration Chicago, I got to interview Lauren Peterson in a private room, and we just kind of like talked for like an hour. And I brought his book, and he went through it page by page with me, and we went through everything. And I brought a space slug puppet, and he puppeteered it for me, and like just really incredible things that I've been just so lucky to experience firsthand. But those are a couple that just stand out to me immediately, for sure.
It's funny though, because Celebration. So speaking of Timothy's on as well, Celebration Chicago. So obviously I went to Celebration Europe with Alan, and we got to see Thrawn get introduced. So that was awesome for me, and even more awesome for him, as he loved those Hate the Empire books. Celebration Orlando. Alan didn't come to Celebration Orlando, but then Celebration Chicago, Alan did come with me, and we were at the. So I'd heard that he was going to be at the Forcecast booth doing an interview. Timothy Zahn would be. Mm-hmm. So I was like, "Well, go down and see the Forcecast boys at this time." And Alan was like, "All right, why at this time?" I was like, "No reason. Pop down and see Daniel, see if he's all right." So went down chatting, and then like there's Timothy Zahn, and like Alan was like, "It's Timothy Zahn." I don't know, and what is? And he was like, I was like, "When the interview finishes, you should ask him for a picture." And he's like, "How do you mean?" Because like we were actually inside the booth, sat at a table, speaking to Daniel Berry while Ryan interviewed Timothy Zahn. So like I timed it like very well, and I was like asking for a picture, and he was like, "Do you not want a picture?" I went, "Well, I got a picture with him at Celebration Orlando, and now he knocked him over." So I was like, I don't need one. Like I've got one, but either way, he's not going to be here much longer. I think once this wraps up, he'll be shooting off, because there was like a crowd starting together, as there is at these conventions. So I was like, we're in a perfect position. I went, if he was quickly asking, I'll take the picture, and then like we'll shoot.
Right.
But he'll be shooting off. He's like, "All right, awesome." So like I managed to, like I said, get Alan that picture with Timothy Zahn, and Alan's not a big one for pictures. He's not a huge fan of them, but like you can see him beaming in that one, and he was just like, "How?"
That's great.
And he was like, "How did you know?" I was like, "Oh, don't worry, like we've got you sorted."
Secrets.
But it was magical.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
No, definitely. Obviously, like Tim Zahn means a lot more to him than he does to me, if that makes sense. So it was really cool to sort of experience, to be standing there and like experience that.
That's great.
So I think I pretty much asked all of the questions. I think really all that's left to sort of do is, do you just want to sum up why the making of Star Wars is Purely BELTA?
Yes. Let me try to summarize it in a way that's not rambly and concise. Okay, I can do this. Okay. Making Star Wars is a miracle. And it's a miracle that we've not only been able to catalog that and chronicle it, but that it's been so public, that it's been so precise, and that it's inspired so many people, including both of us. But now it's inspiring the people that are actually making new Star Wars. And I'm excited to see that continue and continue and continue, so that people can continue to be inspired and learn from these incredible people that came before, the people that will come after, and build this legacy. Because the legacy of Star Wars is George Lucas, but George Lucas is no longer involved with Star Wars, but yet Star Wars continues. And I think that what we've learned from him, not only in what the movies taught us, but in how they made the movies and what that taught us, will only continue to grow, and that influence will only continue to expand. Whether it's a Star Wars movie, or whether it's a big blockbuster, or whether it's a little indie film shot on an iPhone, there are so many different people that can trace inspiration, whether they work in movies or not, from behind the scenes, and especially behind the scenes of Star Wars. And for that, it is what Purely BELTA. So,
and you nailed that pronunciation. Thank you very much.
Yes, it was perfect. Perfect. Great. Just right on the dot, I'm sure. Yeah.
Where can the people find your podcast, Talking B94?
Yeah, you can find Talking Me 94 anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you're listening to this podcast somewhere, I'm probably also on that podcast platform. So iTunes, Spotify. If you want to see some of my dumb tweets, especially like we're talking about the dumb things that I might or might not be trying to buy on eBay or on other websites that are related to the making of these Star Wars movies, you can follow me on Twitter, especially at TalkingMe94. And then our Instagram is just a bunch of behind the scenes photos and updates on what we're doing. So that's pretty much everywhere. That matters, at least.
No, it certainly does. And I'm pretty sure that we have met before. I don't think we've had a conversation. I remember, I don't know if it was Celebration Orlando or Celebration Chicago. Did you go to both of those, Brandon?
I only went to Chicago, so that might narrow it down a little bit.
So it was Chicago, and so like, I'm pretty sure you've walked past me and you've given me a little Talking Me 94 card, maybe. So and I hadn't listened to the podcast at that time, but obviously you give us that card, what made us check it out. But I think I remember your name mentioned as well, which it's crazy how these things are all connected.
Right.
So I remember speaking to Brian Balance because I hung out with him quite a bit at the convention, and something about, did you send him a code to get into one of the panels that you were going to attend?
I did. I think I got him into the Mandalorian panel because we had only interacted through Twitter, and I saw that he was like, upset that he didn't get in, and I had an extra ticket, so I DM'd it to him, and he got in. I waved, and then that was the first time we'd ever met. Was right after that panel. We're all just like freaking out, right? Because it was the Mandalorian panel at Celebration Chicago is probably, like we're talking about earlier, cool convention panel, the coolest convention panel of all time. And then we walk right out, and it's just like a blizzard in Chicago, and me and Brian kind of run into each other, and we're just trying to like hustle back into the warmth of the other side of the convention center, and we're catching up, and it was a great way to like meet him for the first time. But yeah, and so now I'm excited for you and me, Peter, at the next celebration, Anaheim, not only to meet but to co-participate in this coronation ceremony for Mr. Balance. So it'll be really great.
No, it certainly will. It's going to be a turn full circle in 2022.
It'll be really good.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for coming on and letting us know what you think is Purely BELTA about Star Wars.
Of course. Thank you for the invite, and thank you for waking up early to do this with me. What an honor.
Thank you very much. So may the Force be with you, Brandon, and may the Force be with all of you listeners. Thank you very much now. Take care. Goodbye. Please follow us on Twitter at BoresStar. That's at BORESSTAR. And on Instagram and Facebook at Star Wars Podcast. You can also reach us on email at starwarspodcast@gmail.com. The Star Wars Show can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, and wherever podcasts can be found. Please give us a like, subscribe, and don't forget to leave a 5-star review. May the Force be with you.